Introduce our guest for today. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to our third talk for our Women in Transportation Speaker Series. Today we have a very special guest with us. Her name is Heather, and she is currently a senior engineer with the Center for Net Zero Transformation in Rail and Transit at Deutsche Bahn Engineering Consulting and Operations North America. For those of you who don't know, Deutsche Bahn is the national railway company in Germany. As part of her role, she has experience in zero emission strategy development, fleet technology feasibility assessment, emissions analysis, life cycle cost analysis, fleet procurement, and rail vehicle qualification testing. And what makes her path unique is that she approaches her role from the perspective of a mechanical engineering degree and also human kinetics background with previous roles in engineering and consulting, including experience in the rail, aerospace, and forensic engineering sectors. Outside of work, Heather is a director and the current president of the WTS Canadian Education Foundation, which is a volunteer-run, registered Canadian charity focused on promoting diversity in Canada's transportation industry, which is how Heather and I know each other, and she does a lot of great work for the organization. Because of this, Heather was recently honored with the Young Leaders Award from the Canadian Urban Transit Association. So I'm going to pass it on to Heather now to speak to us about her topic for today.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm gonna get my slide running here. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So, thank you very much for having me. This presentation is titled Trains, Planes, and Automobiles because those are some of the transportation modes I've worked with so far, and I wanted to avoid copyright issues with the similarly titled movie. The goal of this presentation is to introduce a few different areas within the industry where I've worked so far, to give you a sense of some of the possibilities out there, and to pass on some things I've learned along the way that might be helpful as you start your careers, things that I wish I'd learned earlier. I'll also explain what a day in the life for some of these roles look like. And then I'll leave hopefully some time at the end for questions. So to kick things off, what's with the foot? Change slide, there we go. It's there because having to touch other people's feet provided one of the first big lessons I learned and was a pretty defining moment in my career path. I was in the process of completing a bachelor's degree in human kinetics and was on an internship at a prosthetics and orthotics place where I was tasked with casting the feet of patients who needed orthotics. The casting room was small and not well ventilated. I did a portion of this through the summer months. Needless to say, it was not always pleasant. And I realized I had absolutely no interest in working that closely with people. That was a big life lesson, and that's going to be kind of the recurring theme through this is things I've picked up. Know what you don't want, because that's just as important as knowing what you do want. I learned that I want a career that does not involve touching people. And I had now completed a degree that leads to a lot of careers that involve touching people. So it was a bit of a loss there. I ended up working for a bit and realized I wanted a career that had a lot of opportunities to learn and no touching people. So engineering seemed like a good place to go. At that point, I really had no idea what I was going to do. I basically started mechanical engineering because it seemed cool and I liked bicycles. And that was the extent of my plans at the time. I attended a lot of events while I was in school for engineering, like this one, to try and get more perspective on what's out there. So kudos to you guys for running this and coming. I think it'll be helpful. It was at one of those events that I met an engineer from Bombardier Transportation. And we got chatting about her work a bit and about soccer and about her son and where she'd grown up. And we generally just had a good chat. At the end of the event, she ended up coming up and giving me her email and suggesting that I send her CV because her department hired a summer student every year. And despite having zero experience with subways or maintenance kits, which is what I ended up working on in that role, They hired me, and a big part of that was that she felt we could work well together. And so that was another big lesson, and one that is still key and in my mind when we're doing hiring for my team now. Skill set and experience is important, but it's not everything. It's much easier to work 40 plus hours a week with people you can get along with. That was one summer. As part of my engineering degree, we had the opportunity to do a 16-month internship. I know you guys do the shorter blocks, more experience. It's great. I had one large block, 16 months, and I completed that with Pratt & Whitney Canada, who make jet engines. I was hired into the development engineering group. They're responsible for organizing and completing a variety of tests on engines that are either a new design or there's been some sort of design change, like a new part. The aerospace industry is extremely regulated for good reason, meaning changes need testing and approval. So this role turned out to be primarily project management. I was the coordinator who facilitated getting engines built and ready for testing, ensuring testing plans met the needs of various engineering teams who were ordering these tests, scheduling with the testing group who performed them, and then writing all of the associated paperwork out with each step, which included summaries of reports of each step. So there's a lot of coordinating and writing. That's been a recurring theme and something I remember being surprised about at the beginning. In engineering, I only did one class that was communications, and communications has ended up being one of the most important skill sets that I've used in my career so far. It's so important that I've noted on my little map here which jobs have been basically communication focused, where the majority of my time is spent communicating, typically in written form. And you can see there it's basically every job. So that's another key lesson is, despite there being not as much focus on it in school, that is a very significant part of an engineering career. Back to Pratt & Whitney. One of the biggest lessons I learned in that role was that treating everybody, regardless of their title or education, with dignity and respect goes a long way. This may seem like a no-brainer. Of course, we should treat everybody with dignity and respect, but unfortunately, that doesn't always happen in the workplace. In this situation, there was a bit of a history with some engineers not always respecting people on the shop floor who did a lot of the manual labor in terms of building up and tearing down these engines. And it resulted in the people on the shop floor sometimes, as a new engineer starting in the role, not an engineer, an engineering student starting in the role, they kind of assumed I'd be one and the same in terms of assuming that I knew more because I was studying engineering. But what I found, and this led to a lot of tension, by the way, between it was basically two sides, the shop floor and the engineering. But what I found was that the people doing the hands-on work knew an extraordinary amount of information about these engines. They knew, in most cases, a lot more than many of the engineers did. So I ended up taking every opportunity I could to try and learn from them. I asked them tons of questions. I watched how they did things. I asked for their opinions on how long tasks would take so that I could schedule my projects better. I asked what could be done differently from my side that would make their lives easier in terms of the processes and how we build and test instructions. Because a lot of that work was defining exactly what needed to happen to ensure an engine was built to spec for whatever they were testing, and then how it needed to be tested based on the regulations that they were needing to meet. But there are definitely ways things can be improved. There's always ways of improving things. And I asked them for their opinion on that. And I think they recognized that I respected them and that I understood how valuable decades of hands-on experience was to our work. And so they started to take a liking to me. And I think this was because I made an effort to incorporate their feedback. The result was they tended to build my engines a bit faster. They sometimes bumped my projects above others in the queue. So my projects ended up typically being done on time or even early, and they were done well, which was an achievement for the intern because everybody else in the role was a full-time employee. it also meant I learned a lot. I got so much information out of talking to the people on the shop floor. And all of that came from treating people with respect and dignity, regardless of their education and so forth. So that was a big key lesson. Towards the end of my engineering degree, I saw a poster on a wall about a Women in Transportation scholarship, and I applied mainly because I needed money. The award required an essay, so I wrote about how cool emerging technology, transportation technologies was, things like electric cars, hyperloops, and I ended up winning the award. And on top of getting a check in the mail, I was invited to the group's annual gala, which included a social before dinner. Um, by that point in my schooling career, I'd learned that attending events like these with a name tag that identified me very clearly as a student would sometimes lead to the employed people taking pity on me and giving me free drink tickets. So that is my goal. That's what I went there to essentially do. And it worked. People came up to chat. I remained well hydrated. And I met a few people at the event who worked in the transportation industry. So I made sure to get their business cards before the end of the night. And that is an important thing to do. A few months after that, when it was nearing graduation, all of us were applying for jobs. I was applying for all sorts of jobs online. I remember scouring those websites, just applying for everything. And I was really trying. I was writing custom cover letters for all these roles. And it was rough. I think I submitted 30 or 40 applications. I got one callback, which didn't end up going anywhere. And that was like, I had 2 degrees, honor roll grades. I was a varsity athlete. I'd been in student leader roles. I had all these extracurriculars. I'd won awards, and I had work experience. And I had a callback rate of about 3%. So it was demoralizing. And then I remembered that I had those business cards. So I emailed the 2 people that I'd met at that dinner, and both of them got me interviews. In fact, I ended up getting offers from both of those companies. And that is how I got my first time engineering role. The networking not only got me past that computer sorting CV review stage and directly into the interview stage, it also got me access to roles that hadn't even been posted online. So this was a huge lesson. Networking opens doors you wouldn't have known existed. It's that important. As an aside, I ended up joining that industry group, which is called WTS. That's what we were just talking about before Mattia did the introduction. I joined as a volunteer in 2016, and then I joined the Canadian Education Foundation Board of Directors in 2017. I cannot stress enough how important developing a network within the chosen industry can be, any industry. It gives you perspectives, it gives you opportunities, it'll give you access to informal and possibly formal mentors and sponsors, and is overall a major leg up in your career development. So for those of you who are looking for transportation-related careers, I highly recommend joining WTS. I recommend this for people of all genders. It is not just for women. There are men involved as well. And I think the membership for students is free. And lucky for you, there's a WTS Southwestern Ontario chapter operating events in Waterloo. So check it out. In all seriousness, this is one of the most important things I did. This was more important than my grades. I've never been asked for my grades, but my network has been all the difference in getting roles. Anyway, back to my first engineering job. So I'd received those 2 offers. Both of them were from consulting companies. Both roles had titles that didn't really indicate what the role was, and they were both going to involve doing something with big transit projects. At the time, I had no idea what either of these roles entailed. I didn't really understand what consultants did in this realm or how projects were organized. I had asked some questions in the interviews and gotten responses that didn't really mean much to me because I didn't know the lingo. Like one of them had said, "Oh, we are on an owner's engineer's contract," and I didn't know what that meant. And I didn't ask further questions because I was afraid of being perceived as dumb. And that was the dumb part. I should have asked more questions. That was the big lesson here is like ask questions, especially like, well, always. You can always ask questions, but like especially when you're just starting out, getting the answers sooner just because you just ask instead of thinking I'll go look this up later or whatever is going to save you so much time, and then you'll get more out of what you're doing because you're going to understand what people are talking about sooner. There's nothing wrong with it. So ask questions. Back to the job offers. I went with the offer that had a higher salary and the closer office because other than those things, I couldn't really tell the difference between the roles just because I had such little understanding of the industry and how these projects were organized and what different companies were doing. But you know, that's how it rolls. So I started as a junior vehicle engineer on this massive transit project, and I quickly learned that the role barely involved anything that I would classify as engineering work. My team was responsible for representing the client. We were on an owner's engineer's contract. And so that means we were representing the client who had purchased a large number of transit vehicles. And we were there to ensure the client was getting what they paid for, essentially, making sure that the vehicles were designed and tested as described in the contract and in technical specifications. We basically kept an eye on the vehicle manufacturer and checked to make sure that they were doing things as agreed. And it turned out that there were a few companies involved in the vehicle procurement contract. So my company was responsible for the project management side of things, and another company had been subconsulted to do the technical work. This meant that I was somewhat limited to project coordinator work and couldn't get too involved on the technical side, even though I really wanted to, because contractually that work belonged to a different company. Since you need technical work experience to get your engineering license, I was pretty concerned about the limitations of being solely in project management. So I started making more of an effort to get different opportunities. And one of the things that I had been doing since I started that role was printing interesting articles and pinning them up in my cubicle. So I had an article about this like bus-like machine that straddled the roadway and then would move along the roadway, but then there's space underneath for cars to travel. And like, I don't think they ever made it, but it was cool. I had things about Hyperloop and wireless charging and hydrogen fuel cells and like all these neat things. I just posted them up on my cubicle wall. I did this initially because I thought cubicles were soul sucking and it was my way of making my tiny cell more interesting. But what ended up happening was people would walk past my desk and they would see these articles and come up and talk to me about them. And so we'd discuss if this technology was like ridiculous or feasible, what it would look like to actually implement it, and so on. And I became known as the girl who likes inventions. And that paid off big time because my company later got a new project to conduct a feasibility study on the use of hydrogen fuel cell technology in a commuter rail setting. And when they got that, the project manager asked right away if I would move to his project, since he already knew that I was interested in it. So the cubicle art paid off and also inadvertently led to another big lesson, which is start conversations about topics that interest you. You never know what that could lead to. And, you know, worst case, you have a conversation about something that interests you. I was so thrilled to join that project. It was really cool. It ended up serving as my stepping stone into sustainable transportation, which I'll get to in a bit. And the reason that was important, to explain a little bit of how the consulting side of things works, consultants are expected to have experience in the topics they are consulting on, which makes sense. This means that it's a bit harder to get onto projects when you don't have directly relevant experience. So if you're somebody who's starting out in consulting like I did, which isn't the typical career path, classically consultants are people with 30 years experience who worked somewhere else and then they come and consult after they've got 30 years experience. But in reality, consulting companies need people from all levels of the career range. They need juniors as much as they need the senior people because senior people are way too expensive to do all the work. They just tell the junior people what to do, and then we do it for a lot cheaper. And in the process, we learn. But to get onto consulting projects, you typically need to have some sort of directly relevant experience, or else you won't even be approved to the contract. They will not let you bill on it. And so as soon as you can get something that's relevant, it's a lot easier to get more projects relating to that topic. Getting the first one is the hard part. So if you're getting interesting experience in any of your 4-month co-ops, that's awesome. It's going to help you if you ended up in a consulting situation later, if they are relevant to what you're trying to a project you're trying to get onto. Anyway, I eventually got pulled off of the fuel cell project and put back into the original role that I'd been in because they needed more hands on deck. And this led me to eventually leaving the company for a role that would involve more technical work because I wanted to get my PEng. So began my time in collision reconstruction. This was a super fun job, probably the most day-to-day fun of all of the roles I've had. The team was great. Some days I was at my desk building computerized simulations using this collision simulation software. Some days I was doing calculations, running Excel models. Other days I was outdoors. I'd be at sites taking photographs or measurements of wrecked cars or intersections or roadway markings. Some days I was in the shop or the yard downloading black box data or trying to sort out if there'd been a mechanical failure. And outside of that, I spent a lot of time writing reports. Communication again. There was a lot of variety and a nice mix of desk work and hands-on work, which I really liked. And I got the technical experience I needed to get my PEng. One thing was missing though, and it was this sense of fulfillment that I'd had while working on a transit project. So even though the day-to-day aspects of this role were a lot of fun and I was learning a ton, at the end of the day, my work was primarily assisting lawyers and insurance companies with their lawsuits. And there is nothing wrong with that. Like, it's totally fine. It's part of the life. Like, somebody has to do it. But for me, it just wasn't it wasn't fulfilling that need. And that was a big lesson, recognizing what's important to me. For me, despite the day-to-day fun, I like the idea that my work is improving my community and bettering transit, contributing to a sustainable way of life. And I actually prefer the less exciting day-to-day role that provides that fulfillment over the roles with more excitement, but that don't provide that fulfillment. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't been exposed to both. So another key lesson is just experience all sorts of things. Like, there's no problems with moving around. I've switched companies every 2 years so far in my career. I'm nearing 3 years now with DB, and that's the longest I've stayed with a place. And there's nothing wrong with that. If anything, it's going to strengthen your ability to recognize what you really want and your experiences. So anyway, I was starting to realize that I needed to find something a little bit more in line with my values. And lucky for me, one of my previous colleagues had just joined a new company that was opening a new branch in Canada, Deutschbahn. Even though we hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years, he called me up and asked me to come help him build this company with him. I was employee number 2. And he said he was calling because he knew from working together previously that I was reliable, I'd learn quickly, I could probably handle this startup-ish environment. We worked well together, and because I had the writing skills needed for bid work, and because I had a network that was helpful in client development. So essentially, my brand and my network got me that job. So this was another key lesson. Build your brand because it's going to speak for you. This was another example of taking a role without actually having any clue what the day-to-day would look like. I did ask him about it in our conversations leading up to officially taking the role, and his response was, "You'll help with everything." And I didn't know what everything was, but it sounded like a neat opportunity. It's not every day you get to go start up a consulting company. Timing was right. I was looking to get back into transit, so I took it. And this was another big lesson. Don't be afraid to take opportunities. I did speak to a bunch of my mentors about it just to get their take, but it was definitely a risk, and I went for it. So I joined DB Engineering and Consulting as a vehicle engineer in April of 2020. And interestingly, vehicle engineering was one of the only topics I ended up having absolutely no involvement in. Titles don't really mean much. Since we were just starting the branch office, we had support from Germany on administrative topics like IT and accounting, but we were starting from scratch with brand development and client development. We only had one contract when I started, which we got through a sole sourcing opportunity through a person we had previously worked with. So again, networking and personal branding, big. And I spent most of that first year report writing for that project and writing bids to try and get more work. The way a lot of consulting companies operate anyway, in transportation is requests for proposals are posted and you have to write out your proposal for how you would do the work and how long it would take you and how much you would charge for it. And then the client takes in all of these proposals and evaluates them and decides which one they like the most or which one is the highest scoring based on their criteria. And it can be an infuriating process because you can write countless bids and not win any work. And that's what I did in the first year that I was with DB. I wrote a lot of losing bids. Where was I? Spent most of the year on them writing bids. Yeah, I helped. Oh yeah. So what else did I do? Because I wasn't doing vehicle engineering work. I helped develop company processes, onboarded new employees, and developed parts of the marketing strategy. I did a lot of business development research, prepped my boss for meetings with clients, potential clients. I figured out what corporate insurance coverage we needed and made sure we had it. I applied for our certificate of authorization, which is the corporate engineering license from PEO. And I got that. I was the sole responsible engineer on that. I dealt with our accountants, our sales reps, recruiting, list goes on, but no vehicle engineering work at all. And despite that, it was still an excellent learning opportunity because in a larger organization, those are all activities typically performed by people from different departments. Had I stayed with the larger consulting firm, I would not have had exposure to so many different aspects of the business in such a short time. So that was a great lesson. Try out different sizes of company. Try different types of company. Don't be afraid to move around and get different experiences because it'll really help you understand what you want in the long run. So back to DB. We eventually won a few contracts. One of them was particularly large. It's a contract involving expansion of the GO Rail system. It's involving numerous companies, billions of dollars, and it's over 25 years of work. If you're looking for a project to spend an entire career on, like, look no further. This was huge. It was so big that the consortium who won it, which included DB, spun off new companies to run that project. And so with that announcement, the majority of my team, which had grown to 11 people by then, transferred to the new organization to work on the GO expansion. I also had the opportunity to move to the new organization. I would have gotten in early, which is better for like fast advancement within an organization typically. And it probably would have paid more. But backing up a little before that, amongst all the bid writing and business development that I'd been doing in the first year or so at DB, I'd met a member of the US DB group who was building a zero emissions team, what they call the ZE team, because Americans. And we initially met because I had requested his input on a business development initiative I was doing that involved hydrogen. This guy has a PhD in hydrogen propulsion technology for rail. Very cool. So I got chatting with him, and in amongst our meetings about that initiative, I got to know him a bit and started expressing my interest in his line of work. And we were virtual, so like I couldn't cover a cubicle wall in cool articles and hope that he noticed me. I had to just go for it. So I did eventually ask him if he needed any help on his team. And I mentioned that, I've worked on hydro before, like, I'd be billable. Don't worry about it. And sadly, he said no. He didn't need any help at the time. But every meeting I had thereafter, I would jokingly remind him that I wanted to join his team. And we maintained like a good relationship until that initiative ended. And then we didn't talk anymore because we didn't need to. And then about 6 months after that hydrogen initiative finished up, he emailed me to say that he had work. And I got to officially start working with the ZE team. And Thankfully, that was before the Go expansion project win. It wasn't until after I started working with the ZE team that I really realized how much I love that work. I'd found it interesting before. It was new tech, it's kind of neat, but I hadn't really realized how strongly I believe in building clean transportation until I started working on these projects full time. So when the opportunity to move to the Go expansion project came, with its excitement and its news articles and the potential for quick advancement and very likely more money, I was able to confidently turn it down. And that was another key lesson. Don't be afraid to turn down opportunities if you know they aren't right for you or if it isn't the right time. So anyway, with nearly everybody from my office gone, including the person who had hired me, who had been in charge of the branch, there was suddenly a need for a new head. And Germany could have sent someone over to run the business. That's a common way to give high potential up and coming management types some experience. They moved all over the world and they could have done this, but instead they offered the role to me on an interim basis since I had already been doing a lot of the work. And this was a huge career development leap. The person I was replacing had over 20 years of experience and had been in management and running the branch of a different company for years before joining DB. And in contrast, I had no management experience, but they gave me the opportunity anyway. And what followed was 6 months of chaos. Since I was still working on client projects and the branch office was going to be transferred to the US groups, there was a whole boatload of administrative work to be done. There were endless meetings, countless things I had to sign, even if I didn't fully understand them. There were HR issues that I was suddenly responsible for addressing. There were payments and invoices and taxes and decisions, and the emails were nonstop, like chaos. But I knew it would be like that going in, and I had agreed to it anyway because it was another one of those opportunities that like they just don't come up often, and I wanted to give it a shot and try a management role. So it was hectic, but an amazing learning opportunity. And at the end of that 6 months as the interim head of the branch was officially closed, and the employees who remained were transferred to the US group, which is called DB Echo North America, which is where I work now. We are 100% remote, which I love. It means I am allowed to remain in Canada and in my sweatpants, and I get to work full-time on ZE consulting projects. This means the majority of my days are spent writing documents, communication again. I also make a lot of PowerPoint slides, I build Excel models, and I attend a lot of virtual team meetings. My company does fly everybody together for an in-person team meeting about 3 times a year, but we're otherwise all over the continent. So anyway, I love my job and I love the work I'm doing. It's not as exciting as some of my other roles, but I'm fulfilled and happy, and I attribute a lot of that to my previous experiences and the fact that I also had so many opportunities to learn what I didn't like and what didn't work for me. And that's what I want to relay to you, is that it's really important to move around and try things and learn what is actually really most valuable to you and what you would prioritize. Yeah, I think that's it. I hope that was informative. If you have any feedback, you want to chat more, please reach out. I'm happy to chat. Basically summarized everything I just tried to say to you here, and my email address is there. So happy to have questions or feedback. And thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really, really informative. We learned a lot, and I'm sure there's going to be many questions from our audience. I think we can maybe start off with questions from our audience if you guys have any, and if I don't see any, then I'll go to our list. So yeah, I guess we'll start off. Yeah, if you guys want to raise your hand, use the raise hand feature, that'll help me a lot so then I know who is going first or second or something with the questions. Okay, so I think first we have Jason.
Hi, Heather. Thanks so much for the talk. You mentioned when you were switching roles, you had kind of pitched the two opportunities you had to mentors. I was wondering if you could just kind of explain like how you found your mentors and who they are.
Yeah, sure. When I was looking at the two opportunities originally, like my first, basically like right around here where I was just finishing school, I had some people that I'd met through different roles. Profs. I asked profs what they thought, but I actually didn't really know anybody in transportation up until I had attended this dinner towards the end of 2015. And the two people that I spoke with most of that dinner, who I got the business cards from and who got me the interviews, I ended up asking both of them about both roles. Like basically, I told them both, look, I got this other opportunity. What do you think? And want just to find out what they said. And they both gave me interesting information and feedback. Like they were trying to explain more what the difference between these jobs would be, which I still didn't really get, but I wasn't afraid to ask them. And those two people I'm still in contact with, that, and this is like 8 years later. So I basically just kind of got sticky with them and just kept emailing them. But the two people that initially I considered mentors were people I met at that WTS dinner. Since then, just to elaborate, through WTS, I ended up meeting a few other people, because when you attend these events, you start to see the same people, or especially if you join one of their volunteer groups, you're speaking with those people once a month typically. And that was huge because I met like the former chief capital officer at the TTC, and she would go out for coffee with me, and like she helped me prep for the interview for this job. So it was people I met primarily through WTS, including men. One of them is Doug Willoughby, who was a previous senior vice president at a few different consulting firms. He's heavily involved in WTS, and he's also one of the people who does a lot of mentorship within the community. Okay.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for that great response. Yeah, WTS is a great organization for connecting you with transportation professionals at all levels. So yeah, I think our next question is from Reza.
Yep. Thanks, Heather, for the great talk. I actually have one quick question. I was thinking that if you want to give some tips to the students to improve their skills, I know that you talk about the different skills, but if you want to prioritize the list of skills that the students need to improve in order to reach in a better position in future in their professional career, what would be your advice for the students?
Good question. I guess I'm going to preface this with, I've primarily worked in consulting, so I can tell you what I think is helpful for consulting, which may be completely different in manufacturing or design types of settings. But what I've found has been the most helpful is the ability to communicate, and that's in written form. That's been almost all of my work. Most of my work I'm writing. I don't do as much calculation. I've never made drawings. So communicating in written form has been huge, and also being able to talk to people. That's been a big part of establishing a network and making like connections with people. Not being afraid to go to an event alone and find a way of speaking with people. When I was in school, that was something I was really afraid of. I'm not great at socializing, and even just going to the events was like a bit of a stretch for me. But going and talking to people really made all the difference for networking and learning and all sorts of things. But I would say, yeah, communication.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Is there any other questions from the crowd before I go to the list? Okay, I guess I'll go to the list. So one of our questions is actually from Mavjot, and she wanted, I think you maybe touched a little bit on this, but just about your journey in WTS, if you'd be able to describe how you began your journey in WTS, how did you transition to the role of the WTS CEF president, and I guess more of how that has impacted you, if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure. So it started with that scholarship. I'd never heard of it before. I actually didn't even really understand what transportation was before that. When I was in school, the award was viewed as like the civil engineering award. But that was like the introduction to learning about them. And with the award came the invite to the dinner, which got me introductions to a few people. And one of the people that I met at that dinner was one of the people I had emailed about trying to get a job. And she ended up keeping in touch, even though that was the company I turned down. And she asked me to come join a committee she was on, which was this is the TAC. I just didn't have enough space to write, but TAC is the Toronto chapter of WTS, and they have a scholarship committee. So I started volunteering with the scholarship committee. And through that, I met a number of different people. And the same lady ended up also being on the foundation board. They needed a secretary, which is a job that involves writing the meeting minutes and doing a lot of organizing, and it's a lot of work, but none of them wanted to do it. And so they asked me to come join the board and do that. So it was through the same person that I got involved with the board. Why do you want to be on a volunteer board? It's really helpful to understand how decisions are being made top down and how an organization makes decisions. It's also a good opportunity to start understanding how boards function if you have an interest in more of an executive career track in the future. So I recommend that. Doesn't matter who it's with, but anywhere you can get a volunteer organization, they probably have a board of directors. Yeah, so basically I got involved with one thing and then people kept pulling me into other aspects of WTS.
Nice, perfect. Our next question is, as a woman in a position of leadership, how did you navigate the power dynamics or resistance that arose while advancing throughout your career?
I've had a few experiences where it's been very obvious that somebody was treating me a certain way because of my gender, or making assumptions about my abilities because of my gender. And the way I've dealt with that in the past, the first time it happened, I quit and I went and got a new job. And the next time it happened, I didn't want to quit because I was enjoying it. And so then I was just so mad that like this guy was wrecking it. And being mad didn't do anything. Basically, I just stormed out of the office and then nothing happened, except I didn't get my work done. So it was bad for me. And then after that, I spoke with friends who work in the medical community. They're physicians. They experience all sorts of sexism as well. And one of them told me to try using assertive communication. And so that's not, instead of being like, you're sexist, why are you doing this? You're sexist. It's more, it makes me feel this way when you say this. It's more about how you're communicating, how you communicate what you're trying to get across. And so I ended up going to that person who was a senior engineer to me, who I reported to, and saying what I wanted. Essentially what had been happening was he was trying to take away one of my files because he assumed I wouldn't be able to lift a part of the car that we needed to bring back to the lab for testing. He just assumed I was physically not able to lift it, which it doesn't matter. He shouldn't have been lifting it either. We all work at desks and we are all super weak. We're desk people. I was absolutely going to get somebody who worked at this auto place to lift it because those people are strong. But in any case, he was saying it was he was saying that my car wasn't big enough to hold this item, which was also complete garbage, and he was giving it to my colleague who was male because his truck was bigger, which was a lie. And I ended up going up to this senior and saying, I want to do this site. I want to do this exam. And he was like, well, your car's not big enough. Yes, it is. I looked it up. We've got a program that indicates all of the interior dimensions of every vehicle. It is big enough. I have checked. And some other excuse. And then finally, you're not going to be able to, you're not strong enough to do this. And I just repeated, I want to do this. I'll figure it out. And I stared at him. And he didn't know what to say and eventually was like, fine. And that was one way of dealing with it. It was much more effective than me just storming off. After that, I ended up talking to a couple colleagues because I wasn't the only one having this problem. And we ended up coming up with the idea of running an unconscious bias seminar, which turned into this full day event where our firm ran an unconscious bias seminar and invited all of our clients. It was this huge marketing thing, and all of the senior engineers had to attend and listen to the whole thing. And that was also, I think, helpful. Although the people who are most biased tend to think they have no biases. So, but that's been my way of dealing with things in the past. I typically just make it so awkward for them by playing dumb and basically making them say what they're insinuating out loud, because they typically won't. And I found that to be effective. That's probably the best example I can give. Yeah.
Yeah, to kind of, unfortunately having to face it head on and then deal with it yourself, or like in the beginning, and then have these networking sessions or seminars after about that. Thank you. Thank you for the response. Okay, our final question is, so we have a mechanical engineering student in the crowd, and as a mechanical engineering student who wants to get into the transportation field, what tips and or suggestions do you have to leverage my traditional mech skills into a job in this industry once I graduate?
There are so many opportunities. Basically, transportation, it hires every single engineering field. I don't think there is, maybe biomedical, maybe not, but even then there's a lot of like human factors and all that. So there's like everybody can get a job. How would you apply your skills? I think it would be really helpful for you to understand what part of mechanical engineering you like. If you're really into the design, you love CAD, and you want to be making drawings, find opportunities to apply that. And that might be, with a transit agency. Their maintenance department, for example, is probably making their own tooling or dealing with little design changes. Manufacturer, they've got plenty of design engineers, mechanical engineers who would be doing that sort of work. Or you might be more interested in other aspects, like if you're interested in project coordination, that is everywhere. It's hard to avoid it. And how to get into it, it's, in my experience, it's really been just who you know. So I would try to find a way of meeting people who work in that field and getting a chance to talk to them.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I think if no one else has any more questions, I think that's our last question. And I think it's perfect timing because we're almost at the hour. So I guess I'll say thank you on behalf of the University of Waterloo IT student chapter for coming in and giving us this really informative talk. And I think it was really helpful for us, especially at the beginning of our careers, when we're just trying to break into the industry and we maybe don't have all the skills that we want, or we don't know who to talk to, or we don't know where to get started. I think this is really helpful for everyone in that sense. So thank you very much, Heather, for coming out to speak to us. I just wanted to ask, do you have any methods for the students if they have any more questions, or if they want to reach out to you about anything that you talked about today? Do you have any preferred method of communication that we can share with the students?
Yeah, my email address is there. That's the best way. You'll also find me on LinkedIn. I don't check that as often, but either of those would work.
Great. Great. Yeah, we'll include both in the recap email at the end. So thank you. Thank you very much again.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. We can wrap it up. So have a great weekend, everyone. And thank you again, Heather.
Bye.
Bye.